What's up guys? One question we get asked all the time here at Drift Games, and especially at our Drift Games drive practice days, is what is the best beginner drift car? Well, today I'm going to answer that question and give you 5. This is Catch My Drift, and let's get to it. What's up guys, Dave from Drift Games here, and we've been involved in running practice days and competitions in drifting for probably 8 years now at this point. And one of the questions we get asked all the time is what's the best beginner car? Well, what you mean by beginner car, let's be honest, is cheap car. Because you know when you go to the track, especially if it's your first couple of times out, you're going to spin, you're going to bump into stuff, you're going to crash, and you don't want a really fancy car to start off with. You want to build your skills up until you've outgrown that car. Then you can see if it's drifting is for you or not for you, and you can invest in something a little bit more capable and fancy later on. So I've had a trawl through the internet, through the marketplaces, to see right now what the markets are like for beginner cars and cheap cars. And there's not a lot. So I've picked 5 that I think are pretty good options. And I think from your perspective, this is more about Ireland and the UK than it would be all around the world, because of course, depending where you are in the world, car prices will differ and what's cheap and what's expensive. But right now in Ireland and the UK, these are my 5 picks for good choices for beginner drift cars. Number 5 on my list is the most infamous car, especially in Ireland, which is the Lexus IS200. Now these cars have taken on a life of their own and have come a long way from their original beginnings as an executive saloon for people to marketing managers and your dad and your granddad to drive. They're now cars that are being doing donuts and burnouts and skid pads all over the country. But are they good as a beginner drift car? Well, these cars have some very good points and have some very bad points, but they did make the list, so I'm going to talk about both. They came out in 2000 and they were generally just an executive saloon like the Ford Mondeo. They were never intended to be any sort of a performance car. They came with 153 horsepower, which is pretty feeble.
You need to push it hard though to get the best out of it.
They have a very slow 0 to 60 time. They're quite heavy as well. But the one thing they are is Toyota reliability. They're cheap. And you can also weld the diff and they will do donuts. Now, they're pretty good at doing donuts, they're pretty good at a bit of drifting, but for track drifting, you would have to drive at 110 or 20% to make them link corners and get them where you need them to be, which might be actually a good point, which means that you're driving a very underpowered car for some of the larger tracks, and then you have to absolutely pedal that car to make it work. And then anything you buy after an IS200 would be much faster. Now, we're not including the Toyota Altezza in this with the Beams engine because they've gone crazy value, but the IS200 is sort of the base model manual that you can get, and to be honest, around about now they're actually rising in value, but I think you'll still get a rough example from somewhere from €1,000, and for a really good example you can go all the way up to €3,000 or €4,000, but you're probably in the €1,000 to €2,000 bracket for a pretty rough around the edges ex-drift car or ex-slab car or donut car as we call it in Ireland, and that should get you to the track and get you drifting to a certain extent, but I would say pray for rain.
Could I speak to God, please?
Let's move on to number 4 on my list. And well, do you want sleek, elegant looks? Do you want a fancy, complicated engine that revs high? Do you want terrible unreliability? Well, number 4 is the Mazda RX8. Now, before you say, Dave, the Mazda RX8 is just going to blow up by just looking at it in the car park, I think they need to be given a chance, and mostly because what have you got to lose? Right now, the Mazda RX8s with 231 horsepower, which is pretty reasonable. They have terrible torque, by the way, because it's a rotary engine, but they still have 231 horsepower. They still can do a skid, has some things going for it. Good diff, good rear end, good gearbox, engine sort of okay, and if it's still running, you will get 231 horsepower, and to be honest, some of them do survive quite well. I haven't seen a whole lot of these on the track, and I wonder what is it just that people have the stereotype that they're so unreliable that they don't want to use them. But if you can buy a fully working rear-wheel drive car with 231 horsepower, good handling, good gearbox and all that for like €1,000, what have you to lose? I mean, you could spend more on tires at a practice day than you would on the actual car of an RX-8. So I think weld the diff and see what happens. So even though, yes, it will blow up at some point, yes, it's probably going to break down halfway through the day, but I think they're worth a punt at a couple of euro or pounds to get out on the track in an RX-8. And I want to see more RX-8s out there because I think they look quite cool with a kit and wheels. So yeah, number 4, RX-8, give it a shot. Okay, we went off the wall with my fourth choice, but we're back to business with the car that everybody knows is probably one of the best beginner drift cars out there, and that is the E46 BMW. Now, the E36s were the king of this particular department, but now their prices are rising crazy because everybody in drifting killed every one of the E36s. Now they're actually demanding big money on the market. So the E46 is still relatively cheap, and the models you want to be looking at are the 325 or the 328. The 325 has a 2.5 inline six with 189 brake horsepower and 245 Newton meters of torque, and the 328 has the same sort of engine, but it has 3 horsepower more, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but you go up about 35 torque when you go to the 328, and of course torque is very, very good when it comes to drifting. What makes the E46 such a perfect drift car? Well, number of things. Number one, they have pretty good steering angle from the factory. All BMWs and Mercedes have very good steering angle. You don't have to do a whole lot there, and even if you do want to modify it, you can swap over a couple of arms from other models, and it's real easy and cheap. Everything for this car is actually pretty cheap because there's so many for braking and scrapyards everywhere. You can also get uprated parts from everywhere. Like, it is a very cheap car to run. They do have their downsides though, and most of those downsides come from they overheat quite a lot, but a lot of guys will automatically wire the fans or uprate the fans and the cooling system, wire it onto a switch in the dash and just have it on constantly to keep the car cool, but they still get pretty hot. They have head gasket trouble a lot of the time due to the heat issues, but mostly they kind of survive a lot of the practice days, and most of the time you'll get to the end of a practice day and all the guys with the high horsepower cars are all packing up, and the guys in the E46s are still going around and around and around. So they're kind of a safe bet. I would say an E46 is probably the safest bet of everything you could get for a practice car, and I think you could probably pick up an E46 325 or 328 from somewhere around €1,500 to maybe a really kind of well-spec'd one at €3,000, and that's a lot of bang for your buck, and you're going to get a ton of practice days out of them. So the E46 sits third on my list. Time to move on to the top two. Now, this might be controversial because we've 2 cars ahead of the E46, and everyone's going to say the E46 is probably our best starting point, but I'm going to argue the case because the number 2 on my list, it's going to really please Josh Holsworth, is the Mazda MX5. The MX5, or in Japan they call it the Roadster, or in the US they call it the Miata, is a very small sports car from Japan that is iconic. I mean, this car has been around since 1989 and it's still around. And it's got the perfect 2-seater, rear-wheel drive, punchy engine, lightweight combo that would be perfect for drifting. They handle brilliantly because they technically have a 50-50 weight distribution, which means that compared to all your big Lexuses and your BMWs, they're actually very nimble on the track, which makes them a lot of fun to drive. Now, I want you guys to forget about the 1.6-litre engine that came in the European models because it's really feeble. You might get a fun day out of it in the wet, but the 1.8 engine is a singer. You can do full tracks, pump up your tire pressures and go for it. And all the modifications you will need for it is weld the diff, or you can shim the diff. Some of them come with an LSD as standard. Put a hydro handbrake in there and then get on to Destroy or Die in the UK and get yourself some steering angle knuckles, and that thing will go all day. They're super reliable, they very rarely overheat, and they're so much fun. Because the car is so small and so nimble, you feel like you're going a million miles an hour all the way around the track. So even if you're not, it definitely feels faster than being in a big, sort of comfortable saloon like the Lexus IS200 or the BMW E46. These feel much more attached to you and the road, so they are a lot more fun to drive in my opinion. And I think because you can chuck them about a little bit easier when they're so nimble, you actually learn a little bit more too. Now, I also want to give an honorable mention here to the Mazda MX5 NC, like the one we're building on our Games Changer series. They're starting to become super cheap, and they come now with 2-litre engines with 158 horsepower, and they're like down for €2,000 or €3,000 because they're kind of getting to the point where people don't want to pay the tax and the maintenance on them. So I can imagine the Mazda MX-5 NC will start to appear at practice days very soon, but my pick of the bunch would be the Mazda MX-5 NA, which is the 89 to I think 97 model, and they have 130 horsepower. If you can get a Japanese one, they might have a little bit more, and they're more than capable with very small mods of getting you day after day on the track, which is exactly what you want. So what car has made number 1 on my list of best go-to beginner cars for drifting? Well, it's the one that I've had the most experience with, and that is the Nissan 350Z. In Mondello Park, we run a drift school. And what is a drift school? Well, you're going to bring loads of random people who have absolutely no mechanical sympathy whatsoever, put them in a car and expect that car to do 8 hours of drifting. And there's only one car that's ever been able to do that, and that is the 350Z. So what makes the 350Z the king of the beginner drift car? Look, I know they're expensive, I know prices are rising, but I would advise anybody to buy one now because they're only going to be higher and higher as we go on because they are a hidden gem. In Ireland, the tax on those cars was so high, people didn't want to tax them, they didn't want to run them, so they became very cheap. You can pick one up somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 euro. And that sounds super expensive for a beginner drift car, but it's actually not when you think about the standard spec you're getting with the car. Most of the European models come with full Brembo brakes, which is like the best you can get. They come with a carbon fiber prop shaft. The rear end diff is a bit like a GTR one, not quite, but similar. Really heavy duty rear shaft. It's got a heavy duty clutch. It's built to last. The electronics on the cars can give a little bit of trouble. They sometimes overheat the power steering, but under the bonnet, that 3.5 V6 makes 280 horsepower. It's people going into competition with less than 280 horsepower, and this car comes with it as stock. Now, one of the downsides of the 350Z is its front suspension setup. It is quite difficult to get extra lock out of them. People put tow arms in them, you can put spacers in them. It doesn't really do a whole lot. They don't have amazing lock, but you can still work with what you have for a couple of practice days. Then you can move on to the guys like FDF Race Shop who do a full Mantis angle kit for them for a reasonable enough price, and you'll get like 60 degrees of lock, and it's a good investment. If you look on the internet, everybody's using 350Zs, from Adam LZ to all of his friends. They're all using them because they can do lap after lap without breaking down. They're reliable, the parts are cheap, and they're so well built that they can take a shunt on the door, the front or the back, and it's the other guy that's going to come out worst of it. So I think from our experience of running 6 of these cars day in, day out at the school, from watching them at track days, from having one in competition myself before, and watching everybody on the internet drool over them, they are the car to buy right now. No matter how much it costs, it's good value. A lot of people say, hey, I don't have the money to buy that car. I think take a loan and invest in it, because you will get a cheaper run through your practice days than buying a 1,000 euro car, 2,000 euro car that in the end is probably going to break and fall apart and not give you the enjoyment or the learning experience, which means that it's actually worthless at the end of your journey. 350Z, you can rip it for months after months and you'll sell it for probably for what you bought it for. So that's why it's the first on my list. Alright guys, that's a simple quick list of a few cars that I would put in my top 5 if I was going into drifting for the first time, into practice days. Now remember, of course, I want you guys to remember that the price of those cars, it doesn't include, you know, a helmet, bucket seat, harness, all those things you're going to need to keep yourself safe at the track, but they're a pretty good bet if you're starting off in Ireland and the UK and want to get on the track and want to start drifting and seeing if it's for you without investing a ton of money. Now if you want to see the other side of that of building massive pro cars, obviously check out our Games Changer series, which comes out every Tuesday and Thursday at 8 p.m. And if you want to support the channel, jump onto our Drift Games shop and grab yourself some merch in time for Christmas. We've got a brand new merch range out at the moment. We put our heart and soul into it, and it obviously keeps our channel going if you guys can pick up some of that. Other than that, we'll be back with more Catch My Drift episodes in the future, so let us know in the comments below, what do you want us to cover? You've put this, I mean, this whole thing was created by your comments, so put some comments below what you'd like us to do the next video on, and also if you could subscribe to the channel, that would be awesome. About 50% of you guys don't subscribe. It means that we can get to you with every single video and you don't miss one on your feed. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Also, you're going to disagree with me. We all know you're going to disagree with me. You're going to say, Dave, the RX8 was a terrible choice. Maybe it was a terrible choice. But what I'm saying is, get on the comments below. Let me know what cars I'm missing out on, what cars you've drifted that are budget, sub 2,000 or 3,000 euro, that have absolutely been perfect, and maybe we might change this list down the line. So let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next episode of Catch My Drift.